Monsieur Bazin, on a
Oui,
5 minutes de
pas de
buffer,
souci,
comme on dit. Donc, on attend 5 minutes. On commence à
bien
9h05.
sûr. Oui, bien sûr. Est-ce que je suis connecté avec la salle déjà ou...
Oui, je crois que il y a une équipe technique qui vous mettra en grand plan ou en plus petit
D'accord.
plan en fonction du moment,
Et,
mais on attend encore quelques personnes.
bien sûr. Et là, je suis pas en micro avec la salle encore, par contre.
Ah,
Si.
là, on nous voit tous. Je vais peut-être
Ouais, d'accord. Ouais,
partir.
c'est bien si je peux garder la caméra sur la salle, c'est plus agréable, je trouve.
Oui, oui. Alors, la caméra sera soit sur la salle, soit sur
Là,
Sophie.
oui, c'est ça. Enfin, ou les deux, mais là,
Ouais,
j'espère que
c'est pas top. Je vais voir si.
le, le COP27 Building Pavilion, ça, j'en ai pas besoin. C'est vrai que ce serait bien d'avoir la salle et puis Sophie. Moi, j'entends pas la salle, par contre.
Euh, alors, je vais.
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Are we all set with Benoit? Okay. Good. Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. So, welcome to this roundtable hosted by Saint-Gobain. Please welcome. Welcome to all of you who are here with us in Charm in person, and for those of you who are joining us online. My name is Sophie Lambin. I'm the CEO of Kite Insights. I am we are sort of creating and curating content on the nexus of climate and social issues. And I'm here as your moderator for the day. So I'm delighted to be doing so this year again, having done it last year. We titled this session Building Capacity and Hope. We could have added confidence because really capacity and hope is what is needed to meet the construction needs to build in a net zero and resilient way. In particular, where population growth is the highest. We're now nearly a full week into the COP discussion, and why our collective focus is really on not retreating from the ambition we set in Glasgow of keeping 1.5 degree alive. It's also clear that the priority of delivering on Africa's and others region development need is really at the forefront of all our discussions. But there is an inherent tension here. How can we build more while emitting less amidst huge population growth and increasingly palatable climate impacts? As I just said, I had the pleasure of moderating a roundtable for Saint-Gobain convened at the COP26 last year. And the objective there was really to rally the whole building value chain towards net zero. The spirit of collaboration was strong then, and it's in the same spirit that we are convening again today, to continue to raise the bar for building well for everyone and in a way that is dignified for growing population. So today, I'm delighted to be joined by brilliant speakers to unpack this challenge of building more while emitting less, as well as showcasing example of best practice. But before I invite my speakers to the stage, I am delighted to invite Benoit Bazin, CEO of Saint-Gobain, who is our host for today's event, to set the scene for us. Benoit, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back virtually at COP. So indeed, last year at COP26, we established our responsibility as a sector. There can be no net zero planet without net zero construction. Today, I want to reiterate Saint-Gobain's own commitment to carbon neutrality and our willingness to lead and help transform the whole sector towards a low carbon, as well as low resources and resilient built environment. Unfortunately, the 2022 Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction highlights that emissions from buildings and construction hit a new high, with the risk now of being off track to decarbonize by 2050. So we all know it's not sustainable. As the urgency rises, so too must our ambition. Our motivation at Saint-Gobain to act is stronger than ever, and we are also seeing more and more actors in our sector along the full value chain taking bold commitments. And beyond commitments, we can already see the solutions and the technologies that we must scale around the world and notably in emerging markets. So for us in construction, in a nutshell, we face three main challenges that are intertwined: how we reach carbon neutrality for the climate, how we preserve natural resources, and third, how we meet the needs of rapidly growing populations, especially in cities. These challenges are also opportunities, but this is what I would like to highlight as an introduction today. First, of course, on the climate. In construction, we know that the climate crisis casts a shadow over everything we do. Not just because construction sector accounts for 40% of global CO2 emissions, not just because it is a challenge for how we build, it is also a challenge for how we retrofit, remodel, and renovate what is built already. 2/3 of buildings around the world will still be operating and emitting greenhouse gases in 2040. But also because it is changing what it takes to build well, which increasingly means light and sustainable construction, low carbon, energy efficient, whether for cold or hot weathers, less resources intensive, circular construction, affordable, of course, and providing comfort for all. The second challenge I would like to highlight is that we need indeed to radically rethink how we use the world's natural resources. This challenge is growing everywhere and notably in emerging markets. In the last 50 years, resource extraction has more than tripled. This is not sustainable. Here also, our sector has a particular responsibility since construction consumes more or less 40% of the world's natural resources and generate 40% of the world's solid waste. So what does it mean to build with less resource, build less resource intensive construction? First, thinking reversibly at the design stage of the building so that it is easier to convert later on them into new uses over the course of the life of the building. Second, thinking circular economy. Buildings will be deconstructed in the long term, and they constitute a bank of materials that can be reused, and we need to think about that ahead. And of course, producing and using lighter materials for the same performance, and therefore extracting less non-renewable resources, making materials last longer, and recycling and reusing as much as possible. The third challenge is, of course, the impact of a rapid growing population and urbanization. By 2050, I think we reached yesterday a number of 8 billion people on the planet. By 2050, we'll be a planet of nearly 10 billion people, and almost 70% will live in cities. That's more than 2 billion extra city dwellers compared to where we are today, mainly in emerging economies. Egypt, for example, is already building its fourth generation of new cities to deal with its growing population. Obviously, without radical change, more buildings will mean more emissions. So again, our sector has a great responsibility here. We have a responsibility to meet this rising need with buildings that are lighter, affordable, more resilient and sustainable, and to do it faster than ever. Now, what is the Saint-Gobain response? The good news is that to meet these challenges, solutions already exist and are available now. As the worldwide leader in light and sustainable construction, we at Saint-Gobain, we are applying them. we are contributing to build lower carbon, more affordable buildings with combinations of lighter and lower carbon materials like glass, insulation, gypsum plasterboard. We are also innovating in construction chemicals to support the development of low carbon concrete. We are designing and manufacturing energy efficient building materials and solutions that drastically limit the need for heating, but also on air conditioning and protect against heat waves in hot countries. We are also proud at Saint-Gobain to be operating in 76 countries. That means we have the ability to scale up fast our solutions across regions, especially those with the biggest population growth expectancy. In each of those countries, we work with local teams and local production. For instance, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with more than 10 million people live in irregular housing or slums, we are developing fully furnished houses for up to 4 people assembled from prefabricated kits that meet thermal and acoustic requirements and can be sold fully installed for less than the price of most automobiles. In South Africa also, we are developing homes that meet sustainable codes that are dignified, that people living on the poverty line can afford. My last point, that there is a limit on how impactful one company can be. This triple challenge of climate resilience, decarbonization, and urbanization calls for a response from the whole construction value chain that operates in emerging countries. All the actors, upstream and downstream, designers, architects, building materials players, contractors, craftsmen, etc. Together, we can work on solutions that overcome key obstacles. And sustainable construction can no longer remain a niche in emerging countries. It must become the new normal. That means that we need, and it is a large challenge, to spread understanding, training, education of what sustainable construction means and how to do it. The global construction sector is indeed a complex ecosystem, and that's maybe the largest challenge. It contains many companies who have the capability to be bold on sustainability and circularity, but there is also a large and deep inertia. So there is a need to reach out to millions of craftsmen, local contractors, etc. So we need to innovate on new construction. We need to adopt the most sustainable modes, and also sometimes to rediscover traditional but very sustainable ways of building. All this takes also to government action. We need that green building labels become more widely used, and they help demonstrate that sustainable buildings are at reach, but also bold regulation linked with the right incentives. These labels, regulation can raise minimum standards, spread best practices, and then ensure that action on sustainability is not a cost paid only by a minority. Through regulation and incentives, governments can send a strong signal that they are serious about decarbonizing construction. Private actors don't need just to wait also for the government. We can already collaborate to accelerate solutions. We can create a sustainable construction industry in each company in the sector, shares knowledge and best practice with others, for example, through coalitions. Coalitions like the Global Alliance and Green Building Councils. What motivates me as the CEO of Saint-Gobain is the knowledge that our sector can move much faster if we make the most of coalitions to drive cooperation and coordination. So groups like the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction and the Green Building Councils are invaluable when it comes to unifying the value chain. So in closure, it is a critical moment. Our sector has much to do, much to learn, but these challenges are big positive opportunities to grow and have a positive impact, systemic, fast and heavy. So let's be bold, ambitious, and I turn back to you, Sophie, our moderator, and many, many thanks to our speakers who are working on this systemic change, Elisabeth Van Ghesi-Shege, Dr. Hen Farou, Tarek El Gamal, and Professor Salah Helagar. Thank you so much for joining us, and be bold and ambitious together with Saint-Gobain.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benoit, for this call to arms to work together to overcome these obstacles, the triple challenge of climate, resilience, and urbanization. So thank you very much for your scene set and for giving us that ambitious challenge. So I'd like now to explore this question with our wonderful speakers who are going to ask you to join me on stage. So Elisabeth Wakangi-Chege. Elisabeth is a sustainable development expert and chair of the World Green Building Council in Africa. And she works a lot with bringing people cool, decent, and energy efficient homes. Welcome, Elisabeth. Next, I'd like to invite Tarek El Gamal, who is the managing director of Redcon Construction. Redcon is a leading Egyptian engineering construction and infrastructure company which recently built a solar field with Saint-Gobain. Welcome, Tarek. Professor Salal El-Hagar, who is the president of Egypt Green Building Council and professor of energy and sustainable development at the American University of Cairo. And Professor El-Hagar is an expert in cleaner production and industrial ecology. Welcome, Salal. Dr. Hen Farou, who got stuck on her way to us because of Mr. Biden's arrival, so I think she joined us online. Professor Farou is Professor of Environment and Sustainable Urban Development, Housing and Building, National Research Center, and she is involved in developing Egypt's national social housing program. Welcome, Dr. Farou.
Welcome, thank you.
Last but by no means least, Emmanuel Normand, Vice President for Sustainable Development. Emmanuel leads Saint-Gobain's sustainable strategy. So please join me in welcoming our speakers on stage. Thank you. So you are going to have to share 2 mics. Yes? Do you have mics on the side of your seats? Wonderful. You have 1 mic. Do you have a second mic? Last year we had 1 mic, so it's a progress. And we also had a wipe every time we were passing the mic. So it's double progress on that front. I would like also to obviously call on you, audience, to contribute at any point in this conversation. We're a small, intimate group, so we're going to make the most of that. And finally, I would like to also acknowledge Bex Porter, who's maybe Bex, you can wave your hands. Here we go. Who very kindly joined us to provide some closing remark. And Bex is the building lead for the Climate Champions team. Even though we're only at the beginning of the day, building day, Bex will kindly provide some commentary on where we are at. So the scene is set. So before we start a conversation, I'll do a little level set, and I'd like to ask each speaker in 1 sentence, truly 1 sentence, to tell me what constitutes green building for you. And maybe Salal, I'll start with you. What constitutes green building for you in 1 sentence?
Green building, it's an excellent opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases and also to reduce the amount of energy consumed, as well as reducing the water consumption, over and above improving the indoor environmental quality.
Wonderful. That was a good long sentence. Elisabeth.
Thank you. For myself, green buildings themselves are resource efficient, so you can look at all the resources that go in there, but also they're socially inclusive and promote health and well-being, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Tarek?
Hi, can I say it in less than 1 sentence?
Yes.
Yes, green buildings are healthy buildings.
Wonderful, thank you. And Emmanuel?
So to echo, green buildings are buildings that are energy and resource efficient, low carbon, comfortable, and affordable.
Great, so the scene is set. I think with that sets of definitions, and we at least know what we're going to be talking about. So I'd like to ask our speakers and participants to be bold in imagining how we should build amidst the changing climate and growing population. And I'm going to start small. And I'm going to ask Elisabeth to start with you. How should we be building homes? And I'll invite our speakers to share some ideas, which can be both projecting yourself in the future, yet a plausible future. And then following that, I'm going to ask, after having heard from some of you, what are the common threads? What are the key principles underpinning that sort of vision of what this future could look like? And then we'll explore the blockers and the enablers for scaling it. So at this stage, I'm going to ask you to share your ideas of what it could be, starting with homes, and then I'll go to you for communities, and then we'll reflect on the underlying principle, common threads between those ideas. So Elizabeth, first to you, and I know you've been involved through your roles at the World GBC in piloting decent, affordable home in Africa that were energy efficient and meet local building codes. And that's what I'd like us to tell us a bit more about.
Fantastic. So starting with the home itself, thank you for that question, because it actually brings the whole experience of being in a building. And I'd like to point back to the pandemic. We were told to go home, stay home, and that's the biggest time that we saw a surge in refurbishments of homes. What does that tell us? That opportunity is to build with passive design principles. We look at our climate. Before we add technology, we look at our climate. I would like a home where when there's daylight, I have daylight across the whole house. I don't want to have lights on during the day. Second, I'd like to harvest rainwater. Water is very scarce. I'd like to recycle the water. I'd like to see nature from my house as well. But at the same time, in the evening, I don't want to feel cold, and during the daytime, I don't want to be too hot. So there's an element of building science that comes to this home. I want to buy and use local materials. I don't want to import materials from very far. I want to know that the materials I buy are actually helping someone else's livelihood. On top of that, I don't want to pay a big premium on my electricity bill or my water bill or even a mortgage. I don't want to pay a lot of money on my mortgage. At the moment, mortgages in Africa are around 13 to 20%. 13 to 20%. That's why we have a high level of people paying their homes over their lifetime and their children, and they remain below poverty lines. So about the home cuts across finance, the health and well-being, as well as trying to get to those levels of greenhouse gas emissions, because having put all that in my home, I wouldn't like it to be washed away in floods or be in an area where I have drought. So there's climatic effects that comes into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And do you have a concrete example that got close to that ideal state that you just described?
Definitely. There are various examples. Some of them are certified, and we started certifying buildings as green so that we can have a level of measuring. And this is where the Green Building Councils come into play. We have quite a number in Kenya, and I'm proud of that. We have quite a number across Africa. But also there's some that are not certified that are actually green. So before a bit of industrialization and a bit of copy and paste, we used to build green. We used to build with local materials as far as possible. We used to orientate our buildings to suit our climate. We used to orientate to suit wind and natural ventilation. Then we thought we're going to be fantastic and adopt technologies or materials that actually don't suit our buildings. So now we're going back to refurbish, as well as looking at opportunities to build better. So I won't mention specific names, but there is a whole list of buildings that are actually certified as green. And what it shows is people can actually do it. And at some point there was a mention that Africa needs to, first of all, build and then go green. That doesn't work. We have to start by building green, and it's not just commercial buildings, it's for everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Emmanuel, can I ask you to comment on this? I know that Saint-Gobain has been working on pilot like these, and what other examples of best practice would you add to what Elizabeth just said?
In each country is a different country. What is very important when we start to think green building in the different countries is to understand what are the local practices and to build on those local practices. We have many examples, Saint-Gobain being across 76 countries across the world with industrial solutions. We have countries as Egypt here, and I think that we will talk about a lot of solution of Egypt with this part of those 30 new cities being built with lightweight construction, so efficient construction, providing energy efficiency and resource efficiency. We have huge developments in countries as Brazil and India, with also a local research center that is being developed, that is providing local science-based solution based on the climate, on the materials being available, working with all the stakeholders locally in order to, yes, adopt solutions which are worldwide solutions, but which are designed based on the local understanding of what makes sustainability in the buildings.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to mention, Dr. Farou, I haven't forgotten you. I will come to you when, in a minute, and ask you also a level set question on definition of green building. So if I now move to a slightly bigger space, communities, and Salah, maybe I can go to you. How would we build an ideal community? Maybe we can pass the mic. I hear you've been working on some green villages here in Egypt. Can you tell us about some of those examples? And then we'll move to a reflection on what are the common principles between those two examples.
Okay, thank you very much, because this is a very important point to be discussed, which is the green communities. In Egypt, just a couple of years ago, President Sisi, he initiated one of the very important initiatives to improve the standard of living of 60% of the population living in the rural community, which is called Haya Karima, or decent life. Within this Haya Karima, or decent life, there is a lot of villages, and we were able to convert one of these villages in Aswan Governorate to be green. And this already done just about a week ago, by the way, where they received a certificate called, Green Communities Certificate. And of course, this kind of initiative, it's very important because, again, it will save a huge amount of water, energy, and improve the outdoor environmental quality as well as indoor environmental quality. At the same time, we are also working with the urban communities, and we already have one in New Cairo, where this one will be a sustainable community. One of the very important features within this community is to save a huge amount of water. I will say the amount of water will be saved within this community, it will be almost about 50 to 60%. And as you know, water is basically one of the main resources for development. And therefore, within this community, we will be able to use what's called water-saving devices, as well as treating gray water by an innovative technology which will be released in this January, which will cost nothing for the treatment, except it will enhance the landscape. And this will be, by the way, it is a community owned by the engineer Tariq Gamal. And I think this is the first community worldwide to have gray water treatment with win-win situation, one for the landscape and one for the gray water, because gray water is almost about 40 to 50%, consumed within the community. And therefore, this kind of innovation will be released. We are working at the American University in Cairo, will be released, inshallah, by early January. And this is one thing which is very important. Another point about the communities, I think this is very challenging when you talk about existing communities and new communities, because communities or building sector in general contribute to greenhouse gases by almost 40%. And if you will be able to convert the existing communities and build the new communities in a green manner, this will reduce a huge amount of greenhouse gases. I think that is the main challenge we are focusing in Egypt right now, and very soon it will be somewhere in Africa, by the way.
Thank you so much, Salah. So this gives us a sense of examples, of emerging examples of success stories. I just want to open up to the room now. If anyone would like to bring any other example of best practice for constructing green homes and communities, and again, the context in warming climates where populations are growing. Any other examples that people might want to bring to the table? Please, Elizabeth.
So we had a challenge in Kenya when we were working on affordable housing. And the government actually wanted to embark on the first affordable housing because we have a deficit of that, and it's the same across Africa. We were given a challenge to build a green home within 5 days and have our own budget to build that green home as a pilot and as a sample house to showcase other people. Within 5 days, we built that house. And the only way we did it as Kenya Green Building Society, and I see my counterparts here, was that we went to people like Saint-Gobain and said, all your green building solutions that you have and other products, please bring them together. Here's a design of a one-bedroom home. We need to show that these things exist in Nairobi, and we need to build within 5 days. And we did it. And that property is actually a showcase, and it helped to underline a requirement in Kenya that all affordable housing has to be green.
Great, thank you for that example. Quickly go to hand, Dr. Faru. You've raised your hand. Would you want to comment on this? I have a specific question to you, but please, if you have an example at this stage.
Yes, thank you, Carla. I have an example of the green social housing, because for the first time in Egypt and in the region, to build the green social housing, which is a bit not an easy and it's a really challenge. As green social housing in Egypt, it means we are building.
We can't hear you anymore. I think you've gone on mute by accident.
We are building a huge amount of for the first pilot is 25,000 units. It will be built in different new cities. So it's a case study that should be mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Magali, can you give us another example? A mic for Magali.
Hi, I'm Magali from Holcim. So I just wanted to give a bit of a different example, which used technology. I could have talked about the project we're working on together on the new capital and how we are using low carbon concrete, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about technology and how we have been using 3D printing in Africa. So we have two projects. One in Malawi we did last year, where we printed in 18 hours the walls of a school. So helping to close the societal gap there, where about 40,000 schools are missing. And because you talked about Kenya, that's why I thought I would bring that example. We are in the middle of printing 52 affordable houses. So I think bringing technology to close societal gaps is not necessarily something we think of, but not only it goes much faster, but it's about using less than 50% of the material. So in terms of CO2, it's very green. And from the usage of the school, I think it's really, really good for the people as well.
Wonderful for sharing this example. And Tarek, there is a mic next to you. Here we go. So we do have two mics. Yes. So Dr. Faru, maybe I can go back to you quickly to ask you to think about what do you see as the common threads or the underpinning principle of such approach to building? And in your experience as a designer, sustainable designer and urban planner, what, in your view, assuming she's still there, what, in your view, are the principles that underscore this example of best practice? And if Hand is not there, is she there? Maybe, actually,
Yes.
Tarek, I can...
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I couldn't see the screen.
No, it's okay. When we are talking about the challenge, the first challenge is finance, especially that we are talking about COP27 and how we are trying to find access to finance for all. So it's a big challenge, but here we should stop and it's some misconception that the green buildings is a bit expensive than the conventional building. And here we should mention that it depends on the design. If we have nature-based design and using the local materials and all the resources that we have in the country, it will not be, maybe it will be cheaper than the conventional or the as usual practice right now in the country. This is a challenge. The next challenge is how to integrate the green technologies in such a building that taking in consideration that these green technologies should be locally manufactured, such as solar systems, for example. And all of us see the challenges of the energy worldwide. So it's important that we have our local solar system products, renewable energy products, and so on. These are the most important challenges from my point of view, especially that the people they are in harmony with such green building, and they are accepting the idea. And we saw it when we comparing and discussing and making survey for the green social housing, how the people interact with the idea and give their points of view, because it's very important to take in consideration the needs of the people and their culture and lifestyle as part of the design.
Thank you. So I think some interesting common principle emerged from that first round of discussion around local approaches, co-creation with local communities, dignified housing, use of technology and lighter material, and so forth and so on. If I can move to you now, Tarek, and thank you for your patience. And you landed with the question of expanding on the challenge. In your work, you are confronted with challenge, and when we prepared for this session, you shared some of those to build greener in Egypt and Africa more broadly. Can you share some of the challenge that you experience?
For sure, we have like the main challenge again and again. I'm saying it's the finance, especially in our country and I believe many countries in Africa. Most of the easy money sitting there to finance the climate and decarbonization is most of it you can enjoy all these incentives if you're taking the money in dollars or whatever hard currency, and we are having always a forex exposure, and that one we cannot really handle. So we need all the financing institutes, whatever the EBRD, the IMF, the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, whatever, to have like a kind of mechanism or a tool to hedge this, and maybe they can take part of the, they can raise a little bit the interest. To give you an example, the devaluation can go like in 3-4 years, like twice. You can lose like 50%, and we're having interest rate on our local currency like 15%, and on the foreign currency, which is most of it is in dollars, is 5%. So we can work something in between to have an easy and access to the finance available there. So this is one thing, and what just and I want to add to what just Dr. Hind Farrouh mentioned now. Actually, the green buildings are maybe less costing, but it needs a lot of the research on materials and everything, and capacity building and leadership, because this is you need to have guys in place. It's a systematic approach. You have somebody to lead this within your company, to lead this one, to build this capacity for those leaders. You need really to invest really some good money on training. Let's me also take this chance, and on the consultancy side, you need to build the capacity, because those guys, again, especially in our country, they are very low paid, very low paid. Imagine you give them like 1% of the total of construction, and you go and you give the brokers maybe sometimes 5 and 10 and 12 from the price of the this does not make any sense. So they are all the time doing cut and paste. I can show you all the specs, all those things. For the last 20 years, they never changed. They never changed. So we need to work really hand in hand, because this is the main part. If this part is really done and really studied and everything, you, as the Dr. Hind just mentioned now, I believe the cost of construction is much less. But you have to have first, which is the 5 R's. It's rethink, reduce, reuse, recycle. So rethink is the research, is whatever you name it.
Thank you for that. So access to finance, affordable finance is clearly a key point that you had mentioned. But I'm just wondering whether you had, anybody else on the panel had other sense of the key challenge is, I know, Emmanuel, you'll have views on that, is alternative to conventional construction well known and understood? There are preconceptions that lighter, lower carbon construction is not strong, resilient, can't be used for multi-story. What do you think are the other challenges for really scaling those opportunities? Emmanuel, do you want, Elizabeth first and then Emmanuel?
I'll take a quick one. I think access to materials. When we talk about the value chain, we might know what we need to use to build, but we can't access it. And a lot of the distributors are actually stationed in the main cities, yet we have secondary cities that are actually building now, and you can't access the green materials. So it is a challenge, but it's a great opportunity for material producers to actually transcend beyond the current cities, because especially in Africa, the cities that will exist in 2050, 80% of them are yet to be built.
Yes, so we'll come to that point. How do we think about a system where the provider of those materials and the cities are located in the same place? Emmanuel, what from your views are the key challenges?
I mean, I think a lot comes to confidence. Confidence from all the players that yes, it's possible. We gain confidence through examples, and there's great examples that has been shown. We gain confidence, examples being at small scale, being at bigger scale. We gain confidence because more and more players are working together and demonstrating that yes, it's possible to change the way building and construction is being made, and it's attractive. It's attractive because way of living is better, because it's attractive also for the workers in that field. It's not just, I would say, traditional way of construction, but it's digital. It's talking about the future. It's addressing the challenges of the planet. And confidence is a way to bring sustainable construction at scale. Finance is one of those elements that will become more attractive if confidence is there. The role of the government is essential. It's being shown outside of this room that we have only 16 countries in the world which has a correct building code. So at some stage, to transform at scale the built environment, you need to have visibility. And the visibility is coming from the way the regulation is evolving in that field. But for the governments to be able to somehow take the lead to develop a regulation and to change the way the sector is handling building and construction, it needs confidence. It needs confidence that there will be materials, that there will be people, that there will be capacity, that there will be solution, and that it will remain affordable.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room has a thought on principles needed or challenges to overcome? So let's move on then to thinking about cities. We've gone from homes to communities to how ideally we would build cities and the ecosystem as a whole, which we start touching on somehow. Egypt, I think, Salah, you say, is now building its fourth generation of new cities, and which all have the ambition to be sustainable. And I'd like to hear from both Salah and on what have you learned from past generation of building cities in Egypt? And how is this informing your view of the future of how we're going to build sustainable cities in Egypt? And maybe, End, I'll start with you.
You will start with me or Dr.
Yeah,
Salah?
please go ahead, yes.
Yeah, learning from the three generations, the previous three generations. Firstly, that the cities should be livable, which means it should has its services, its people has their own work in the city, transportation. So everything should be in the city to have integrated city. This is the most important lesson from the other three generations, and should be connected with the main cities and the main services. For that, we can see in the fourth generation, for example, the new capital city. We can see this the new capital city is the smart, the sustainable cities. We can see that they took into consideration that the city has all services, resource efficient. So we can see that 50% by regulation on all the rooftop of the city installed on it solar PV system, and already installed. We succeeded to cooperate with the new capital to install in the governmental zone on the top of 52 buildings solar systems. District cooling, they have district cooling, rainwater harvesting. Many issues took into consideration. They have part of the regulation that all the investors there they should follow. So to have it livable, to have it efficient in the resources, and at the same time to give incentives to the investors. Incentives is very important issue. So if you will have the city without investors and without the private sectors, it means that this city will not be totally livable as it should be.
Thank you, Hand. Salah, do you want to add anything to that?
Sustainable city is very, very challenging. And if you remember, Sustainable Development Goal number 11, it is focused mainly on sustainable cities and communities. And I remember in 2017, I started this initiative, but not only for cities, but for green communities. And I published a book called The Rise of Green Communities by Springer, and now it is used worldwide about green communities, not only for the urban communities, or rural community, but also for the industrial communities. Now, why I feel this is very challenging, because the problem in Egypt, it is, as mentioned by Engineer Tariq Gamal, it is awareness and capacity building. And therefore, I try to do some kind of capacity building similar to United States. Even I did some kind of cooperation with USGBC at that time, because United States, they have 8 rating systems for green buildings, and one of them, which is called LEED, and they have 1.6 million buildings green. Over and above, 40,000 shopping mall green, and I think about 20 cities green. In the same time, which is the most important part, they have more than 200,000 green experts. And therefore, green communities and green buildings will provide a lot of job opportunities. That's number one. And number two, it will encourage the local market to produce low carbon embedded materials. I think this is a main challenge, is to have a low carbon embedded materials. And we already started this program at the American University in Cairo 2 years ago. And now we have some product to be used in the green buildings, which is low carbon emitted materials. I think this is a main challenge, again, to not only conserve our natural resources, not only to improve the indoor environmental quality, outdoor environmental quality, not to satisfy the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is the health and well-being, but to reduce the greenhouse gases. And that is the key issue behind sustainable communities.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth, if I come to you, and you alluded to how do we industrialize well in the context of urbanization? Can you maybe share some of your thoughts on that?
I think if we had one solution, a lot of the corporates would be doing it. But I think the opportunity with manufacturers of materials is actually to get into the advocacy space with the green building councils, with collaboration with all the parties involved there, because we have been advocating for green building materials. So the manufacturer has green building materials, but then it doesn't help anyone if it's in one place or you can't access it. So I mentioned about finance and the mortgages. So join the green building councils on the basis of the incentives. Be part of the conversation and advocacy for incentives from governments, whichever incentives there are. The second part is as well as looking at the footprint of where you're operating. Africa is huge. It's a huge continent. I always say you can fit China, India, most of Europe in Africa. But approaching it in the sense that it's one small country and one city at a time, then it removes that opportunity of actually using the right materials. So I think a lot of the companies need to go back to the drawing board, especially in a COP that's in Africa, to consider how they're actually expanding their value chain, the opportunities around there. And we have over 70% of the population is youth. So we have a lot of, I like you mentioned about capacity building, skills transfer. We have over 70% youth who have the opportunity to be part of manufacturing these materials away from the current cities and looking beyond that, because we are building our nations at the same time right now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to do for a last round, and I go to you next, Tarek, before I invite Bex to conclude. But Emmanuel, you really point to the need for greater level of confidence in order to really accelerate and overcome some of those challenges and accelerate our ability to scale the deployment of green buildings. So maybe, Tarek, I go first to you. In your view, how can we really create the right kind of narrative so that there is, and you touched to this issue of narrative, so that we can really build a movement that will accelerate green building and give us the confidence that the solutions are there?
I believe it's selling this, the whole thing about its decarbonization and sustainability and thing. I believe it's at the end of the day, it's efficiency, and it's proven that it's really feasible. Whatever you're spending, you're getting it back in after the technology now is much more developed and affordable in a way that when we did our first green building, this was back like 10 years ago, we have to do 4 layers of glass to get the coefficient. Now it's the technology, the low E glass, and it's affordable, and it's starting to have like balanced prices and stuff. So we need to create the awareness through the efficiency. It's efficient. So it's this was raised, by the way, during yesterday. I'm a member in the ABLC, which is the Africa Business Leader Coalition, which is an initiative from the United Nations Global Compact. And somebody raised this issue during the round table yesterday, which I believe it's very much. We need to show people that this is feasible. It's paying back. Really, you have nice figures when you go. You have to sell it this way. I know that you have to create this decarbonization and the awareness that all human beings are going to suffer and all this, but at the end of the day, the words of today means business for tomorrow. Whatever words so business means numbers and figures and feasibilities and IRRs and all those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarek. Bex, why don't I bring you at this point to say a few words from your perspective, and then we'll do a final close with our speakers.
Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So yeah, thank you for inviting me today to give some closing remarks. I've been asked, is that better? Yeah, sorry. I've been asked to speak a little bit about where we see buildings at the minute with regards to COP27 and the week that we're in. I'm the built environment lead for the Climate Champions team. For those of you who don't know, that role involves bringing non-state actors closer to the negotiations, so the action and ambition of businesses and cities. So really pleased to be here. I think the discussion's been really great to hear, and I couldn't help picking up something that I'm often thinking about, is that we have this really urgent challenge. We're not talking 2050, we're not really talking 2030, we're kind of talking 2025, next year maybe. We need to build resilience to the climate shocks that are already happening around the world and to the communities that are facing them. But we need to build that resilience without locking in all of these emissions that are only going to make those climate shocks worse. So we have this real narrow opportunity to get this right for people. And I think the point on community knowledge and bringing communities in is really pointed as well. Indigenous communities around the world have been building, with technologies that, with very low-tech solutions, actually, not technologies, that are allowing them to have these efficient homes, raising them slightly off the ground so you don't get the heat gain from the earth, using passive technologies and building orientation around the solar shading. I think some of the discussions here about getting back to that is really key. And actually, we have this huge demand for low carbon materials. This is Industry Day today, and our sector can send a huge demand signal to heavy industry, to glass, to cement, to steel, to concrete, that the industry needs these low carbon materials on an extremely tight time frame, because currently, we cannot get to net zero construction without those material supplies getting us that final step, that last chunk. In terms of buildings at COP so far, I think all of us probably in this room would have the same view that the attention that the building sector gets at international kind of climate negotiations like this is simply not commensurate with the emissions that it is responsible for. Benoit set that out in the beginning of the session today. But the momentum is growing. We can see that in the wonderful buildings pavilion. There are over 140 events this COP on buildings and the built environment that I know about. You may have more, please tell me about them. How many do you think there were at COP 18? There was one. Someone WhatsApped me that this morning. There was one event on buildings at COP 18. Just one. Just one. This time 140. So the momentum is starting to build. I've just come this morning from the Breakthrough Agenda event. The Breakthrough Agenda is hosted within the Clean Energy Ministerial now, and it's where countries commit to action by 2030 and use international coordination and collaboration gains to really speed up that transition to low carbon technology. So you may remember last year there were breakthroughs announced in steel and clean power, for example, where 45 countries, representing 70% of GDP, agreed to a statement on action by 2030. Well, today the buildings breakthrough was welcomed. The leadership of France and Morocco, who will champion a buildings breakthrough and ask countries to commit to taking action on buildings to be near zero carbon and resilient by 2030. And just in that room this morning, Germany, the UK, Canada, Egypt, were all present and all acknowledging the criticality of that sector. So let's take this momentum. I think a lot of us in the sector are very good at having these conversations within our sector, but I think the points that have been raised today really show us that we need to take this message outside of our stakeholder group that we're familiar with. We need to take it to finance investors, to banks, to industry. We have the business case, as Tarek said. There will never not be a need for homes for people, right? We've talked about the urbanization trends. Elizabeth spoke about the challenges in the scale that is needed in Africa. We have the mechanism to unlock job creation, to unlock healthy streets, new industry creation even. So let's try and convert this momentum, which is fantastic to see, into political goodwill. You know, the cost of inaction is simply too great, and I agree, we need to put a dollar sign on it, put an Egyptian pound sign on it, put whatever currency you like on it, and take that outside of this room to those that can really help us scale up the solutions that we all know that we have and we've heard about today. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bess and Bex. And I will just close with asking each of you one very quick question. What do you think the global north should be learning or is learning from the global south on how to build well for a climate-ready and low-carbon future? Salah, do you want to start? Very briefly.
Green community is the future. Green building sector will reduce the greenhouse gases by huge amount of percentage. That is my message.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
I think the global north is definitely learning on the basis of the passive design principles. Do not ignore the climate, and the climate changes are not waiting for us to learn, so we have to design, not to just the climate that's documented. We're now designing to the climate that we know we're going to get with the climatic effects. So we're back to the drawing board on that basis.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Tarek?
We stay like 90% of our time indoors, whether it's offices, homes, whatever, commercial buildings. So, and who's staying there is the human being. So we need to not to focus on the climate. We need to focus on the human being. It goes for sure to the climate. So we need to focus how to make his life much happier, much healthier, much, and then we transform all this to whatever the outcome of it. Okay.
Thank you, Tarek. Emmanuel?
For me, it's urgency and speed. I mean, we may think in the global north that in this resilient building environment, we have time when there's 30 new cities that are being built in Egypt, and how many all across Africa. I mean, we don't have time to build well, sustainable from the beginning.
By design. And Dr. Farou?
Actually, I totally agree with what Dr. Tariq said, that we need to focus on the human being and the people, and how to be in harmony with the climate and with the environment. This is the main issue, not to focus only on the climate. The human and the people, they are the core of what we are doing.
Great, thank you very much. I want to fulfill my promise to letting you go on time. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much to Saint-Gobain for yet again hosting this conversation, this very important conversation, and next year to having 300 of them rather than 100. So thank you very much. Please join us for coffee outside this space. Thank you.